Hi, I'm Ryan Bledsoe from the Duo Musical Playground. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to play with the code so that you can make it your own and make changes to it so that it sounds the way you want it to sound. We're going to use the music output sketch that we used in the previous tutorial, which you uploaded to your Arduino or your microcontroller. If you look at your code, there's 3 basic sections in a sketch. We have the section where you declare variables. There's the void setup section and the void loop section. The void setup and void loop sections will always be labeled. The other section with the variables is not necessarily labeled, but it's at the very top of your sketch. So you can see that in this sketch, we have one variable, and it's the pin for the speaker. We don't have to set this up as a variable if we don't want to, but it's easier if you do, because then if you decide to plug in your speaker to a different pin on your microcontroller, all you have to do is change this number to the number of the pin that you've put it into, and you won't have to make any changes anywhere else in your code. The void setup section is where you'll declare things as inputs or outputs. So here we're declaring our speaker as an output. That basically just says that the speaker is going to do something in the real world. It's not something we're going to interact with, but we're going to experience it. Another example of an output would be an LED or a light. That's something that we can see. A speaker is something that we can hear. It's an output. We'll talk about inputs a little bit later, but an input would be something that you interact with, like a button or some other kind of sensor that allows you to touch the microcontroller or touch the board and control the sound that way. The final section is the void loop. This is the area where you're going to tell the code what to do over and over again in a loop. Let's look more closely at what we're telling the microcontroller to do in this music output sketch. Anything in your code that's after 2 slashes is a comment. So it's something that you're telling the computer, but the computer's not using it in creating the code and creating the sketch that you're sending to the microcontroller. This is just for your own personal use. So here I'm reminding you, make sure that this number matches the pin of your speaker, because later in your code, for example, in the void setup, you're saying the speaker is an output. The only reason the computer knows what speaker is because you've already told it that it's pin 7. If you didn't declare speaker as pin 7 in your variables, you would have to put the number 7 here instead. And your microcontroller then knows that pin 7 is set to an output. It doesn't know it's a speaker. It doesn't need to know it's a speaker. We're calling it that to help us, so we know what it is. You can see that we're using this variable speaker in our void loop section as well, saying speaker and sending a frequency to it. So let's talk a little bit more about what we're saying in this loop. Tone is a command that the Arduino IDE understands that means to create a sound. It requires 2 things after it. The first thing is where the tone's going to come out of. So it's going to come out of our speaker. If we hadn't set up speaker as a variable, we would have to say 7 there. We'd have to tell it which pin. But here we're saying tone out of speaker, which is pin 7, comma, and then we have to tell it a frequency measured in hertz. We're not going to go into frequency in this tutorial, but just know that you can play with putting different numbers in here to hear lower sounds, higher sounds. Just play around with it. Test and see what's the highest frequency your speaker can output and that you can hear. You could also test the lower limits. What's the lowest frequency that your speaker can output that you can hear? It will depend on the piezo buzzer that you're using. Not all of them are the same quality, and they will have different capabilities. The next part is the delay. You're basically just saying, make a tone and then wait this amount of time. The amount of time is in milliseconds. So you're saying here, make a tone, send it to the speaker. This is the frequency of the tone. Then wait 1 second. 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. Okay, then you're sending it another thing. Send a tone to the speaker at this frequency, then wait 1 second. Send a tone to the speaker that's at this frequency, wait 1 second. And then we have a new command called no tone. No tone is just sending nothing. You're sending silence. It's not going to make a sound. So send no tone to the speaker. Notice there's no frequency after it because that wouldn't make sense. If it's no tone, it can't have a frequency. And then wait 1 second. And it's going to loop that over and over again unless you unplug your microcontroller from your computer.